I'm doing a series on big-hearted Academy Award nominees for 2026, and is Hamnet a big-hearted film. And in this video, I'm going to analyze the film's portrayal of art and magic being a portal between life and death, which is kind of out there, but then the film is very much out there. So of course we were gonna have an out there theme. I think of this film as being in a similar vein as the hit musical SIX, which I saw on Broadway, in which they take the 6 wives of Henry VIII and they have them tell their story. We have spent so much time thinking about Henry VIII, and they are just this group of women that we don't really know that much about, and they often get maligned. And in reality, they were real women that were a big part of history. And there's a whole movement in art to take these women that shaped history and try to bring them to life for us from their own perspectives. And that is what this film does. And it follows the life of, we know her as Anne Hathaway, not the actress, though I love her, but Shakespeare's wife. Legally was called Anne Hathaway, but Maggie O'Farrell, who wrote the novel Hamnet, decided to call her Agnes because that was the name that her father wrote in his will. And she said, look, if somebody knows the name, is the father. So she goes by Agnes. And what Maggie O'Farrell set out to do was to create the best match for the William Shakespeare that we know, that one could imagine, given how little information we have. And she went to his plays. She went to the women in his plays, to the most beguiling and powerful and amazing women in his plays. And that's how we ended up with Agnes, played by Jessie Buckley. And the screenplay is co-written by Maggie O'Farrell and Chloé Zhao, who also directed, and she won the Academy Award, 2 of them, for Best Picture and for Best Director for Nomad, which was another incredible film with Frances McDormand being this woman that is just unstoppable and you can't look away from. So the film is a love letter to forgotten women and to their power, but also to a kind of art and spirituality and magic that we may have lost a little of in our very digital lives. And I would say it's a roadmap for how to return to it. One of the few things that we know about Shakespeare and his wife was that they got married and she was 26 and he was 18. Whoops. And she was pregnant. And over the years, we have spent all this time trying to figure out why she's been turned historically into a horrible wanton woman who seduced him because she was older, or she's been turned into this very ignorant peasant that he sort of ended up with, because what we do also know is that they spent years separated from each other. But Hamnet tries to tell a different story about who they were. And we would love for one of the playwrights who did the most incredible writing about love ever to have had an amazing love story. And in this case, we have Shakespeare played by Paul Mescal and Agnes played by Jessie Buckley, and they just fall in love really, really quickly. The attraction is so powerful, and she's wild and difficult to understand and mysterious, and people say her mom was a witch. There's all these things about her. And as a way for him to seduce her, not necessarily sexually though, probably, he tells her a story. And the story he tells her is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, which is one of the great love tragedies, because Orpheus has a very happy marriage to Eurydice, and she gets bitten by a snake. She ends up going into the underworld, and he is so devastated to have lost her. But he's also so talented with the lute that he manages to sing the three-headed dog into sleep that guards the path between the underworld and our world. And he goes down and he convinces Hades to let him bring Eurydice back. But the deal is that he must not look back as he's about to cross. He must believe that she's behind him. And because he can't hear her, he turns and then she goes back to the world of the shadows. And Will is telling Agnes this story right by this tree that is the most magical, big, whimsical tree that has a big hole inside its roots that looks just like the portal to the underworld. There's no three-headed dog sleeping on it. But this space, which we keep on returning to throughout the film in different versions of these voids, these like black spaces, is a reminder of love's temporality, and that this film is looking at a love story that was always going to have something of the mystical to it, but also something of loss, which I guess most love stories do. We are from the start being told that in this tale, we are going to work with people dying and with the attempt that one has to bring them back through art, and how that attempt might not quite work, but it might create something very long-lasting that for centuries later, people will still be moved by. As Hamnet works through the question of who in the world would be worthy of being Shakespeare's wife, what kind of a woman would be a good match for him, we land on Agnes. And yes, she is the daughter of farmers, and she is also this creature of the forest. And there's legends about her mother being a forest witch. What we do know is that her mother died, and she was left afterwards with this very stern stepmother. But she and her brother have kept the ways of her mother, which are witchcraft in the best kind of way. They understand how to heal with herbs, and she has a hawk, and that she feeds, and that it's always around. And yes, she does her work in the land, but she also spends a lot of time just being with nature, the way that a lot of the Shakespearean fairies and characters do. And she has the ability to touch you right here and see your future. It's unclear whether she could write. Only 10% of women could write back in Elizabethan England, and they tended to be part of the nobility, and she wasn't. But the way that she's portrayed, she has a different kind of wisdom and a different kind of knowledge that comes from the earth, that comes from her powers as a woman of the land. And when it's time to give birth to her first daughter, Susanna, which is the baby she was pregnant with when they got asked to get married, she goes to the tree where Shakespeare told her the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, and she releases these primordial sounds of powers, and she births her baby on her own in the woods. this magical woman giving birth to this magical creature in the most magical way that you can. And again, just like Shakespeare was giving us these plays that are so full of wonder and magic, she's birthing something in the exact same way. And we know that this baby is going to be just fine because it was birthed with all the power that a baby possibly can be. Hamnet, on the other hand, it's a different story. Hamnet, which is, among many things, a story about the death of a child and how one finds ways to recover from it or to immortalize that loss through art, portrays the birth of this little boy in one of the most moving and powerful ways. Agnes gave birth to her daughter out in the forest, but when it comes to giving birth to her second child, there's a huge storm and she can't go out because she might get stuck out in the forest with a baby. So they make her give birth at home, and she can't do her thing. She can't do her witchy thing. She's in a living room and it's really hard for her to do this. And she gives birth to a little boy, and he's just great. And he's healthy and fabulous. And then they're like, oh my God, it's twins. And she gives birth to a little girl. And the little girl comes out and she's all weak, and the midwife just takes her away because it's a dead baby. And Agnes says, no, give me my baby back. And she holds her, and then she slowly comes back to life. Very slowly. It's not a big, it's a very tiny come back to life. But here's her miracle baby. Here's her very strong son. The little son is named Hamnet. The little girl is named Judith. And based on this birth story and how they came into the world, her worry about those two children is always focused on Judith, because she is the one who was weak. She is the one who almost died. And she knows from her witchy self that by the time that she is on her deathbed, two of her children will be alive. So Agnes has the wrong idea about which baby will die, but she's not wrong that one of them will. And when we look at stories that happened in the past, it's a good idea to look at what life was like then to understand what the characters are feeling and how they're reacting. And in Elizabethan England, only 60% of the children who were born made it past childhood. So if she had 3, the chances were fairly high that she was going to lose one. And of course, the fact that you know that some of your children will die does not mean that it's not deeply painful when they do. It just means that it's something not unexpected, the way that it tends to be for us today. So this is a story of grief that she knew was coming, but that doesn't mean that the grief doesn't hurt. Our titular character on Hamnet is Hamlet, and he is played by Jacobi Jupe, and he has his beloved twin sister Judith, played by Olivia Lynes. And just like Agnes has spent their whole childhood worrying that Judith will die, so has Hamnet. Twins, they're very tied together, and they have all these games and all these languages, and at some point he dresses like her and she dresses like him, which is a very theatrical thing to do, and they switch parts. They're very intertwined, and he has inherited his mother's sense of responsibility for keeping her alive. And when she gets the plague, which killed a lot of people in Europe at the time, he takes that responsibility to the next level. They think she's going to die, and he, who is the son of a witch, who has been taught how to be in the world in a magical way, gets right next to her face and he says, I will take your place. I will go. You live. And as he is dying, we see him in what is like a stage. And there's a black meshy curtain that we can see through, but it's still dividing us from him. And he is in this place and he is so sad and so lost, and he keeps calling Mama, Mama. And meanwhile, Agnes is holding him and she's trying so hard to bring him back, and she's trying to feed him all those herbs and just telling him, I'm here and I love you. And it's devastating because he did this thing so bravely. He chose to go instead of his beloved sister. But once he gets to the other side, he is terrified and he has that separation. We can see that his mother is right there, but he's somewhere else, so he can't sense her. He's all alone, and it's one of the most heartfelt and devastating portrayals of what happens when we die and how deep is the cut and how profound is the separation and how painful it is for us to lose the people we love. Even though Hamnet is billed as the film that shows us how little Hamnet's death inspired Shakespeare to write Hamlet, we don't get there until much, much, much later in the film. But in order for Will, who was not there for the death of his son because he was off doing theater, to atone to Agnes for having left her to take care of the children, he didn't leave her, he didn't abandon her, but his life took him elsewhere. He was making his art, she was raising the kids, and she's really mad at him that he wasn't there and that their kids suffered so much. In order for him to atone for all that, he writes Hamlet. And it's not just about atoning to her, it's about coming to terms with his own grief over the passing of this sweet, sweet son that he loved so much that he hardly ever got to see as much as he would have liked to. In the film, and apparently in real life, he used to play the part of Hamlet's dad. He was the ghost. And we see him in his costume, and she has come to see the play. She's very mad, but she's come to see the play. And the actor who plays Hamlet is Noah Jupe, who is Jacobi Jupe's brother. So in reality, it's the older brother of Hamlet's actor who is playing Hamlet on stage. And we see her be completely transfixed by this iteration of her son. And Hamlet used to love to play swords with his dad. He had said that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be an actor who would use his sword in his dad's company. And here is this other version of him doing the very tragic Hamlet, but very well done sword fights. And she finally forgives Will, and she finally forgives herself. She wasn't exactly blaming herself, but I think she was very confused as to how she didn't realize which kid she was going to lose. And as the play ends and Hamlet dies, she brings up her hand almost to touch him, the actor, but it's also really she's trying to touch her son. And everybody on the first row where they're standing also does the same thing. And as she's doing all of this, she looks up and there's her baby, Hamnet. It's like a backstage, dark space. He can see her, she can see him, he smiles, and then he's gone. And you get this sense that now that they have properly said goodbye, he really can go into that beyond, but without the fear that he was feeling the first time. Like, because the first time he was like, he felt so lonely, like she wasn't there, and now that time has passed and he can move on knowing that she will forever love him. And through his art, Shakespeare gets us to forever, all these years later, like centuries later, continue to grieve our own losses as we grieve his son indirectly. And that is how, in the film at least, he gets his wife back, whatever version of her we like, and how they all come back together as a family. And that is a hell of an ending and a wonderful way to tie it all together that I hope Shakespeare would appreciate, and Agnes as well. I certainly did. So I hope you've enjoyed this analysis of Hamnet and a little bit of the historical context of the time during which these incredible people that are still shaping our stories lived. And tell me, do you agree? Do you disagree? What was your take on these characters and their love stories? Do you like stories where we try to imagine these women and try to bring them back in creative ways? And what are you thinking about the Oscar movies? Which one is your favorite so far? I hope you will share, like, comment, subscribe, and as always, stay big-hearted.